Cyrus Griffin's season in the chair arrives like the last careful breath before a long swim, measured, deliberate, and entirely aware that the air he is gathering must carry more than just himself. When he takes up the gavel as President of the United States in Congress assembled, the Confederation is already living in the tense quiet after a decision. The states have argued, pamphleteers have boiled ink into prophecy and panic, and a closed-door summer in Philadelphia has offered a new frame with a larger appetite for power and a tighter grammar for law. Ratifying conventions debate it one by one. The old Congress, not dead and not quite alive, must bless the birth of the thing that will replace it, and must do so without sulking, without vanity, without making the country feel that it has traded one weakness for another. That is Cyrus Griffin's work, to steward a government that can no longer compel, so that a government that can will not have to apologize for how it began. He did not arrive from the common run of New World biographies, those brisk American paragraphs about boys who read by candle in a frontier cabin and grew into men who read by candle in state houses. Griffin's path bent through Scotland and through a marriage that laced the plain Republican thread of his life to a strand of old world nobility. Born in 1748 in Virginia, he was sent, like a handful of Tidewater sons whose families wanted polish along with competence, to study law at the universities of Edinburgh and perhaps Glasgow, where the air in those years was thick with the last lights of the Scottish Enlightenment. In lecture rooms, where the law was a science and rhetoric a craft, he learned how to write the kind of sentence that can hold an argument without spilling it. And he learned the habit of thinking that institutions are delicate machines rather than arenas for personal triumph. He also fell in love with a woman who carried an earl's blood in her veins, Christina Stuart, daughter of the Earl of Traquair, an attachment that drew him into a romance perilous enough to require a private marriage and loyal enough to survive the politics of two continents. He came home to Virginia a lawyer with a European temper for form and a personal life that taught him that public opinion is not the only weather a soul must endure. The Revolution found him less in the field than at the desk, where his talents were more needful. In 1780, when the Congress created a court of appeals in cases of capture to give coherence to admiralty decisions, the prize cases that were a kind of blood flow for the Patriot War economy, Griffin took a seat among the judges. The work was arid in the telling and vital in the doing. Privateers had taken ships, port courts had condemned or released them with a vigor that sometimes outran law. Foreign creditors peered at the new Commonwealth through these quarrels and decided whether it was serious. Griffin's opinions and his manner signaled that the United States intended to be legible to the world. Rules applied even when a hungry people wished them otherwise. Treaties and custom constrained vengeance. Property could be called such without a musket within reach. He proved himself a magistrate for whom exactitude was not fussy virtue, but civic necessity. That habit of mind, cool, procedural, insistent on the dignity of written decisions, made him a natural for the next chore the nation would ask of him. By the time Congress raised him to the presidency in 1788, the Constitution had already been carried from the green baize of the Philadelphia Convention out into the weather. Delaware had ratified first, with the speed of a mercantile state that could recognize a harbor's future when it saw one. Others followed, grudging or exalted, each state composing its own miniature epic out of the same long poem: fear of a new crown, hope for a real purse, doubt about distant officers, fatigue with neighbors' tariffs, the memory of a winter when soldiers had rapped their musket butts on the stones of a capital that had nothing to give them but apologies. When New Hampshire said yes in June of 1788, the arithmetic turned. 9 states made the document law among themselves. Virginia, great and suspicious and essential, came next. New York argued itself hoarse and then yielded to both argument and necessity. The old Congress, still sitting in New York, watched a new government take shape over its shoulder. It was an odd spectacle, like seeing your portrait painted in a mirror. because the old body had to decide whether to pretend that nothing had changed or to help organize the thing that would replace it. It chose, with Griffin at its center, to be graceful. Grace required a specific act. The country needed dates. A republic which had chosen to begin again needed a public calendar that would make the beginning orderly rather than theatrical. On a September day in 1788, Congress, with Griffin presiding and signing, set the machinery of the new system into motion with a resolution that was unromantic and indispensable. The first Wednesday in January would be the day for states to appoint electors. The first Wednesday in February, the day for those electors to vote for a president and a vice president. The first Wednesday in March, the day when the new government would commence proceedings. The phrases carry no thunder when you say them aloud. They do, however, carry a republic across a chasm. They translate ratification, a series of scattered affirmations, into a schedule. They take what had been an argument about ideas and force it to become a sequence of acts, and they do so without swagger. The old Congress does not put itself on a balcony to be cheered. It looks at the clock, writes down the hours, and promises to leave the door unlocked for its successor. Griffin's hand is the one that steadied that paper. In that gesture, you can see the basic cast of his presidency. He is not a theorist or a pamphleteer. He is a steward of endings that must also be beginnings. The docket in his chamber is full of the quiet problems that bloom when something large changes in a complicated world. Loyalist claims and British creditors still haunt the state courts. The treaty that ended the war still needs to be lived rather than quoted. Western lines drawn under the Northwest Ordinance, the Confederation's best statute, need to be made real by men with chains and compasses. And the governors and judges appointed to the new territory need to be told in exact language what their powers are and what they are not. Arthur St. Clair, now in the West as governor, sends word of treaties attempted and alliances fraying. The Fort Harmar Council, assembled in early 1789 under the shadow of old failures at Stanwix and McIntosh, will be another paper levy against a river of fear. Spain still plays delicate games at New Orleans. British officers still look down from forts the treaty says they should have left, waiting on the United States to keep promises about debts and property that the United States cannot force its states to honor. Foreign ministers address Congress with elegance. Congress must answer with ceremony that does not sound like begging. Griffin's voice never begs. He writes as a man who knows that one of the proofs of sovereignty is the ability to reply in complete sentences even when you are poor. At home, the old machine creaks. Quorums come and go like weather. Winter roads erase the line between public duty and public impossibility. The Confederation's greatest enemy has always been absence of money, of soldiers, of compliance, and now, too often, of men in their seats. Griffin has no marshals to dispatch and no salaries generous enough to stiffen resolve. He has only the tools of a moderator and the stubborn courtesy of a man who believes that punctuality is a form of patriotism. He writes to absentees in a tone that makes shame feel like good manners rather than like punishment. He orders the agenda so that the business that requires a full chamber lands on days when the benches are most likely to be filled. He lets the old forms continue to dignify the old body while he shepherds the new forms into being. Certificates of ratification received and entered, proclamations sent to governors, resolutions that keep the Northwest Ordinance's school sections intact and its jury rights sounding like law rather than like a wish. He understands that the Confederation's final virtue will be the manner of its disappearance. A weak government can die petulant and teach the nation to despise what it was. Or it can die generous and teach the nation to remember that even feeble forms administered with decency keep a people from turning on one another. Griffin chooses generosity, which in this context means restraint. He refuses to let the chamber become a salon of the aggrieved. He declines to comment on the Constitutional Convention's audacity in exceeding its formal commission. He declines to bury it under compliments that would read like apology. He treats the new frame as if it were what the nation had meant to do all along. The tone matters. In a republic, tone always matters. It makes the difference between a civil war that begins as a quarrel and a quarrel that ends in a vote. The personal story that brought him to this exact competence shades the public story he is now writing. Griffin is a Virginian whose learning was taken abroad and whose marriage added the weight of a Scottish title to the life of a Republican lawyer. That odd combination, a New World politician with Old World in-laws, produced a temperament alert to dignity without being addicted to pomp. He knows how to receive a visitor with grace and how to draft a rule without a flourish. He is at ease with the idea that a document can govern behavior. He is less tempted than some to treat law as a canvas for self-portraiture. Those qualities make him a judge by instinct. After his presidency, he will become a federal judge, taking a place on the district court in Virginia and then on the circuit that will carry him across roads he already knows by smell and season. But in 1788 and 1789, he is already acting like a judge who happens to sit in a legislature, hearing all sides, ruling narrowly, keeping the record clean, remembering that the nation's grandchildren will read what he and his clerks write. The last months of the Confederation do not drift into sentimentality under his hand. The chamber continues to do business because it must. There are accounts to settle, pensions to confirm, and the constant trickle of petitions from veterans who do not phrase their pain extravagantly, but whose pain is extravagant. Griffin is not the man to sweeten a ledger with rhetoric. He is the man to see that a certificate becomes a payment when the statute allows it, and to see that the statute is not bent until it breaks. He sends the language out to the states that will be responsible under the new Constitution for choosing representatives and senators. He acknowledges, with the same steady tone, the ratifications that arrive and the hesitations that linger. North Carolina is not ready to step into the new room. Rhode Island is determined not to be rushed into it by the scorn of larger neighbors. He wastes neither paper nor posture on their obstinacy. He writes them letters that assume they will, in time, do as their own interest requires. In a season of constitutional heat, he aims for constitutional temperature. If you want a single act that fixes his usefulness in the public imagination, return to that September resolution that set the federal clock. It is so plain a thing that historians sometimes treat it as a piece of housekeeping. Housekeeping is what saves houses. By fixing the first Wednesday in January for the choosing of electors, the first Wednesday in February for the electors' votes, and the first Wednesday in March for the beginning of the new government's operations, the old Congress emancipated the future from squabbles about who should go first and when. It spared the country the spectacle of states inventing their own calendars and then accusing one another of fraud or tyranny. It created a rhythm that would carry forward for generations, a habit of the first Wednesday that knit an era together. And it did so under a president who understood that the right kind of modesty is indistinguishable from statecraft. Griffin does not call attention to the act, he performs it. The days that follow do not flatter the old body. March 4th, 1789, arrives with the inevitability of a bell, and the new Congress cannot assemble its quorum on that day. Roads are bad, inclinations are worse, and the reality of the new frame, that it will require men to regard national duty as more than an occasional ornament, has not yet been internalized as a habit. Some would make of this a parable about American unseriousness. Griffin knows it is merely evidence that habits must be cultivated. He tends to the last chores the old Congress can do, then lets the curtain fall at a decent hour. He does not stage a drama about dissolution. The Confederation gives way not with a bang, but with a minute. Adjourned. The new Congress will eventually gather. It will count the votes that give a once and future general the presidency. A new world will begin in a room where a man lays his hand on a book and promises to execute the office faithfully. Griffin does not force himself into that scene. He has already written its prologue and exited without a bow. It would be unfair to let the bigness of that structural work devour the smaller legislation, by which he tried to make the old promises as real as possible while the country waited for the new promises to become enforceable. The Northwest still needed judges. The territories still needed the postal routes that confer civilization more reliably than sermons do. The merchants still needed signals in the mail that Congress meant to protect contracts even when it could not guarantee payment. Griffin used the Confederation's remaining credit as if it were a candle, burning only what was needed, shielding it from drafts, carrying it carefully through rooms where a stumble would mean darkness. He had learned in Admiralty that a nation's character is legible in how it treats the stranger and the loser. He carried that ethic into the chair, and he sent it back out into the world in the shape of letters that did not lie and resolutions that did not promise what could not be performed. To understand the peculiarity of the role he played, it helps to hold two images at once. In the first, a body that has been ridiculed, sometimes justly, sometimes lazily, as a debating society stirs itself to a final act of competence and dignity, and its presiding officer makes that act look ordinary. In the second, a people who have chosen to be governed by a stronger center must be ushered gently from suspicion into trust. Griffin is the hinge between the pictures. He treats the old forms as respectable enough to be respected one last time. He treats the new forms as respectable enough to be trusted without sycophancy. The temptation to editorialize is strong for men at such thresholds. He resists it. He knows that institutions survive better on schedules and precedents than on oratory. He gives them schedules and precedents. There is, too, a human scale story about a man who had married into aristocracy and still found his honor in the American manner, in doing necessary work without making a bonnet of it. Friends remark on the tenderness of his domestic life, the odd grace of a Virginia lawyer sitting at table with a woman who had been taught to move through rooms where titles precede names, and the way that marriage became a school in balancing pride and courtesy. In public, he is the same, a gentleman who does not need to prove that he is one, and a Republican who does not need to sneer at those who once were. He can accept a bow without offering a cringe and can return it without offering a grovel. In a period when Americans are inventing a national character in real time, part grave Puritan, part hospitable planter, part brisk merchant, part restless farmer, Griffin's blend is a reassuring one. Unshowy competence, good handwriting, a preference for settled law over improvisation, and a patience for tedium that borders on moral courage. After the articles have gone still, and the Constitution has found its voice, he goes where men of his sort go, to the bench. Washington, who has a gift for recognizing an unflashy talent and asking it to serve, names him to the federal district court in Virginia. The job fits him as the Admiralty appeals fit him earlier in the decade. He writes opinions that do not glitter and do not crack, and he carries the new federal law out into counties that have grown used to treating national statutes as weather reports. He becomes, along with a handful of other first-generation judges, one of the Republic's daily proofs that the new government is not a parade but a practice. Where party heat rises, he lets statutes cool it. Where local pride puffs itself up against federal forms, he lets jurisdiction do its quiet work. He is not a hanging judge and not a soft one. He is a man who believes that the rule of law is not a slogan but a schedule of work, and he keeps to it. If you step back from the dates and the docket, a simple truth about his presidency comes into focus. He closes one book and arranges the opening of another, and he does this without tearing a page. In a world that often confuses decisiveness with violence, that achievement is subtle enough to be missed. But nations are held together as much by careful handoffs as by heroic grabs. The Confederation could have died bitter. It could have tried to starve the child in order to prolong its own sunset. It could have dramatized its own injuries and taught a generation to treat change as betrayal. Under Griffin, it died usefully. It set the dates. It tidied the room. It left instructions on the table. It went home. The limits of what he could do are not marks against him. He could not conjure a revenue stream out of a set of states that had long since learned to confuse refusal with principle. He could not make North Carolina and Rhode Island ratify a constitution by shaming them in public. He had lived too long in Virginia's pride to mistake pride for ignorance. He could not force British officers to abandon posts while British creditors wrote letters that state courts threw away. He could not make the Fort Harmar signatories trustworthy to one another by the magic of a seal. He could not make the new Congress arrive on time. He could do the things a moderator can do: put questions, insist on votes, draft accurate minutes, keep the language clean, and with one plain resolution, convert a philosophical crisis into a timetable. He did those things, and in doing them, he gave the new regime a gift rarer than rhetoric: an untroubled birth. Imagine for a moment the chamber where he spent his last season of mornings under the Articles. The light through the windows in late autumn is the thin gold that makes wood look older and paper look more forgiving. The benches are never as full as the docket deserves. The secretary's handwriting, still crisp in the first hour, wanders a little in the fourth. A messenger brings in a packet from Richmond containing Virginia's formal attestation that the new Constitution is now the law for Virginians. Another brings a packet from Providence that does not yet contain what New Yorkers most wish to see. Griffin takes each and has it read with the same sober civility, then has each entered into the minutes that will be bound up and shelved and, for a time, forgotten, until a later generation, hungry for origins, will search them out like miners seeking a seam. He proposes the resolution that will keep the new calendar on pace. He directs that the circular letters go out to governors, reminding them that the Republic is a clock as well as a conversation. He adjourns at an hour that lets men walk home before the streets are fully dark, because he knows that Republican dignity is built as much out of the habit of returning tomorrow as it is out of the passion of staying too late. There is something almost liturgical about his stewardship. The prayers are not ornate. The ritual is not gilded. The congregation is restive, but the service is completed, and the people leave with the sense that the institution has not failed them, even if it could not give them what they asked for. That feeling, gratitude without intoxication, is exactly what a free people need to carry from one constitutional moment to the next. Griffin does not demand more from the hour than the hour can provide. He does not inject drama where the law is trying to remove it. He allows the Confederation to end as a form ends when it has done what it can by passing along its best habits and declining to pass along its worst. It is tempting, at the end, to weigh his name against the others who sat in that chair in difficult seasons. Mifflin with his choreography of Washington's resignation, Lee with his cool shepherding of the land grid into law, St. Clair with his steady hand on the ordinance that would shape the West. Griffin's distinction is quieter and therefore more essential. He stands at the precise seam where the old frame must concede and the new frame must commence. He neither luxuriates in nostalgia nor preens in anticipation. He makes the concession clean. He makes the commencement punctual. That is not the stuff of statues. It is the stuff of continuity. And for a nation that had gambled its peace on the capacity to start over without starting a war, continuity was the most precious commodity available. He dies in due course. After years on the bench, a man remembered by other lawyers as a presence who made the new federal law feel like an heir to the old colonial and state laws rather than an alien imposition. He is not the hero of schoolroom declamations and not the villain of any cautionary tale. He is the citizen who turned an argument into a schedule, and a schedule into a government, in a republic that often mistakes noise for power. That achievement deserves the quiet we tend to give our most trustworthy judges when they enter a room and sit down. We lower our voices, we put our papers in order, and we prepare to do the work. When you tell the story of the American presidency, beginning with a hand on a book and a city craning its neck to watch, remember that another presidency ended a few weeks earlier in a room with fewer spectators and less certainty. Its last incumbent sent out letters, signed a resolution with a small flourish that did not call attention to itself, and refused to make a tragedy out of a success. The final virtue of the old Congress was that it understood when to leave. Cyrus Griffin taught it how.